Thank you all for having me after learning about supersonic and how much fuel they're going to burn in the air. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the issue of carbon reduction and why that's important to us in general aviation and where we're going from. And so hopefully I will only make 5 of you fall asleep during this conversation, because obviously sustainable alternative jet fuel is something that I find exciting, but most people probably don't find exciting. So with that said, I have a flanger up here that I hope to work with. So basically, when we take a look at the process, the whole idea about sustainable alternative jet fuel is to reduce the carbon imprint. And there's an opportunity to reduce it by 70% if we do it right. So in the traditional sense, we have the refining process, and then we go through shipping, storage, transport, fixed storage, refueler trucks, aircraft fueling, and by the time it gets to the aircraft, there's been a lot of carbon waste in the process. So when we take a look at sustainable alternative jet fuel, we're looking at renewable sources of energy, whether it be corn, whether it be bio waste, or it be actual waste, or grapeseed, whatever it is, algae, that you're able then to turn into a carbon form and then create a carbon product that then can be blended with traditional jet fuel itself. But the problem is, for example, right now in the US, there's one producer, Altair, or World Energy in California, that's providing the product, and they're only producing about 4 million gallons a year. However, Gulfstream grabs some of it, but the irony of it is that Gulfstream then has to have World Fuel take it by train across country. So the question is, how much reduction of the carbon footprint is that when that happens? But what's great about the fact that Gulfstream has been experimenting with it, along with Bombardier has been experimenting with it, is that we're able to show that business jets can in fact fly with it and be viable on it. And one of the first steps that we did in trying to figure out where do we go with sustainable alternative jet fuel is to demyth it. So maybe some of you remember, but at E-Base last year, you had the 5 association heads up front, all smiling and looking beautiful, and talking about the Sustainable Alternative Jet Fuel Guide and where we're going with it. And so we have those guides here. They're at the table over there. So if you want some great reading to put yourself asleep, feel free to grab one of those. But it talks about the chemistry behind it and how it works. Because the reality is that sustainable alternative jet fuel is certified as an ASTM spec. And so it is the chemical equivalent to that of ordinary petroleum-based Jet A. So there's no difference. So if you're an FBO, which some of you are out there, a couple of you, when you get that from your fuel provider, they certify that it's according to the ASTM spec, and that's all you need to know. However, the economics of it are such that they would never provide you it because it costs a lot of money. It would make you as an FBO not very competitively viable as such. So when we take a look at this fuel supply chain, we're trying to deal with the process of it and the blending and the logistics of it. So the point the key point is that where you are in the US and where you are as far as being able to create the sustainable alternative jet fuel process, right now there's only one, and that's in LA. So Gulfstream gets some of it, but the remainder of it, United buys up and puts in LAX's and LAWA's general fuel tanks. So if you're flying out of LAX, and let's say you're at Signature out of LAX, believe it or not, you're flying on a decimal point of 1% of sustainable alternative jet fuel. And the reason for that is United takes the credit for it. And so we have IATA and that group focusing on, in the commercial space, saying, you know what, we need this stuff. Why do we need it? It's a great message. Everybody thinks about airplanes. that they're big polluters and whatnot. And so the airlines are saying, we need the stuff, and we'll gobble it up. We'll take it all. And where does that leave us in general aviation? Nowhere. It really does. And so, sadly, we're in this place where we as an industry have to decide, okay, how do we make this viable? How does it work? So right now, for example, Altair, or World Energy, they produce 45 million gallons of sustainable fuel. 41 million gallons of that is biodiesel. So for 2 days a month, they make some adjustments, and they all of a sudden create the sustainable alternative jet fuel. Why do they do that? Because for every gallon they make, they get a $1 tax credit. But there is nothing there for sustainable alternative jet fuel. You talk to any of the producers of biofuel, they say, why should I do this? I'm making money before I even start with biofuel. And why is that? Because there's a demand for it. There is a requirement of 300 million gallons a year of biofuel for the truckers. There is no demand for us for general aviation until now, because what we have is an issue of something called CORSIA. That's where ICAO got together and they said, you know what? We need to be green and responsible. So how does it affect us as aviation businesses? For most of you, it doesn't whatsoever. You've got to basically burn more than 1 million gallons a year for it to kick in. So if you have a couple planes, probably not going to happen per year. And it also depends on what countries you fly to. If you're flying inside the US, doesn't affect you whatsoever. So the question is, why do we care? And the reason why we care is because in the commercial space, they keep talking about how we're not such nice people. I'm inside DC. I experience it on Capitol Hill all the time, where the message is often that we're the polluters, we're the greedy people, and we don't really care. The irony of it is that, for example, when you talk to people that own planes, they'll show up and they're all about the environment. They show up at Van Nuys Airport in their Elon Musk car and then hop in a Global 6000 and fly to New York City to catch a show on Broadway for the day and then fly back. How green is that? And so there's this issue of perception. What is the perception and how are we going to combat it? So with that said, the alphabet group associations got together, so that'd be NBAA, GAMA, EBA, IBAC, and NATA. And we said, we've got to demonstrate that there is a demand for this, that there is a viability for it. And so with the help of World Fuel and AvFuel, we were able to get a totemistic amount. And on January 16th, we are going to be having a demonstration of this. And so Clay Lacey, I see Brian Kirkdoffer here, Clay Lacey, Castle and Cook, Jet Aviation, along with some other company called Signature, is going to be part of that process of, for one day, pumping sustainable alternative jet fuel to demonstrate that there is a demand for it and that it works. Because oftentimes, we would get the questions. When we initially did a working group to create the Sustainable Alternative Jet Fuel Guide, we talked with the FBOs and the operators, and they said, how do I know that I can even fly on this stuff? And the answer is, well, some of you already have been. You just don't know it. And Gulfstream's been flying on it. Bombardier's been flying on it. It works. And it's the chemical equivalent. So first we have to demyth it. Now we have to demonstrate that there is a place for it. And then after that, we have to convince the taxing authorities to treat general aviation or aviation in general the same way that they treat the truckers, to provide us that tax credit. Because until we get that tax credit, you know, we are going to be in a very uphill battle whatsoever. Because to the supplier and talking to the refiners, they say, okay, Tim, I get a dollar tax credit for it. So, and it already cost me more, and oil prices are low, so it's easy for me to create the kerosene or the Jet A. Why do I want to go through the extra step? Because I'm not convinced out there that you guys are going to buy the stuff. I'm not convinced at all. So that is where we as an industry, that's where the associations have to get together and convince the refiners, yes, there is that demand, and yes, we need to provide that tax credit. So it's a very sobering and sombering process, and we are pushing a big rock up a hill right now, and we are in our infancy stage. I was talking with a friend who's been working very hard on this project with me, and we think we're 4 or 5 years away from it. But in the meanwhile, there's going to be these one-offs, and what's great to hear is that companies like Gevo and Fulcrum, so Fulcrum is taking, at Reno, they're taking waste, out of the trash dump and creating biofuel out of it. They're creating a bio-crude. And then the refiners can take that bio-crude and do whatever they want with it, whether it be biodiesel, whether it be sustainable alternative jet fuel. There's another group called Red Rock that takes wood waste. And their plan is also to create a biofuel that can be then blended with it, with the process. And so, however, those are just 3, with the one in California, those are just 3 entities. And combined, they'll produce 100 million gallons of fuel. But yet there's already a demand for 300 million gallons by the truckers. So how does it work? How do we make this happen? And if any of you have any answers, please come up here and I'll turn over the mic. But other than the fact is that we have to be cognizant of it. And so the idea of the associations coming together and speaking in one voice on this is that we're trying to combat the message that the commercial airlines are saying, which is that we're polluters, we're wasteful, we're not nice human beings, or whatever they say about our industry on a daily basis on Capitol Hill and the swamp. So with that said, when we take a look at the footprint itself and where it goes with the footprint, the refinery has to be next to where the FBO is. Otherwise, this 70% savings in carbon reduction just goes out the window. Because with petro, we have the system down, the infrastructure down of how to get stuff from point A to point B, whether it be through a pipeline. This stuff doesn't go through the pipeline. It just doesn't work that way. It has to be trucked in or trained in, and we're basically dealing with every time it's moved, there goes the carbon value, less and less and less. So for example, if you take a look at algae, one would think, oh, that's great. So they do the process of it. By the time they get it to the end, it's 130% higher than petrol. And also then there's the argument, okay, in this world, do we take food products? So the Gevo product is like ethanol. They're taking corn and producing an ethanol type product and then blending it there. Are we taking food away from people? What should we do with it? So these are all questions, and if you talk about sustainable alternative jet fuel purists, they say, oh, you can't do corn, you've got to do bio waste, cow byproducts or whatever it is that you deal with, or different types of oils from plants or switchgrass. But all those things don't grow or are created in certain places, which creates the whole infrastructure nightmare. So the point I have to say to you all is that we are in our infancy stage, and I appreciate the efforts of Clay Lacy, Signature, and Castle Cook, and Jet Aviation for taking a bold move with us to prove that it works and that there is a demand out there. So that's basically what we have. So if you have any questions, I know I'm keeping you all from lunch, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take some.
Okay, we've got questions from Slido. Chad has asked, from AIN, has asked, why just a 50-50 blend? Why not 100% jet fuel, biofuel?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it ranges from the product. So for example, the product that we're going to be using at the Van Nuys is a 70-30 blend itself. And there are 5 annexes. It's talked about in this book, but it talks about the blend ratios and how it works with it. And but the reason for that is when they test it and they deal with the molecular structure, if it gets beyond that certain blend ratio and how it breaks down, it just doesn't work. So there has to be, right now, a actual petroleum portion of it.
There's another question. Carbon dioxide currently constitutes about 0.041% by volume of the atmosphere. Nice knowledge. I think they're saying the business aviation contributes that much. How is the extraordinary investment expected by our industry expected to be effective, other than just purely by optics?
That's a good question. That's, yeah. Right, yeah, so that's the issue I mean, that's the question we have. Is it smoke and mirrors? Are we greenwashing this issue, or is there a viability for it? In our position at NATA and in talking with our operators and many of our FBOs in key markets where there is a demand for this, is that we need to make a difference. So for example, at Van Nuys Airport in Ilawa, they are part of a whole green initiative right now. They are focusing on seeing how green they can go. However, thanks to the good old Commerce Clause, there's nothing that California can do to prohibit us from selling Jet A, because I bet you California, like they did with a lawsuit of the Attorney General under 100 low lead, would love to just stop, jets from flying because they're polluters. I mean, that's a reality. And so until that regulatory framework is in place, which we don't want, we have to take a conscious effort and move forward as an industry. Otherwise, we will be regulated, and we don't want to be regulated.
Great. Thanks so much, Tim.